My guest today is Michael McCaleb, a great videographer here in Los Angeles who does destination work as well, and we talk about some of his favorite disaster stories from wedding, including a fist fight caused by a cake feeding gone bad. We talk about how he picks music for films, how he uses the audio content, and overall what constitutes a great speech, a great ceremony, and some of the things that you probably want to know. But I'll tell you, this is a fun conversation. He's got lots of great stories, and really enjoyed talking to him, and thank you to him for joining us. Here we go. My name is Brian Franklin. I am the co-founder of Vows Speeches, where we help people write and practice personalized custom vows, wedding speeches, ceremony scripts, and all of the speaking parts for any kind of event. If you or someone you know needs help with one of these things, please reach out to vowsandspeeches.com. That's VOWSAND speeches.com, or you can email me directly at Brian, BRIAN, at vowsandspeeches.com. My guest today is Mike McCaleb, and he is the owner of Michael Scot Films. He's a videographer here in Southern California. A really nice guy. I got to meet him recently at one of the Curate California events run by our previous guest, Robin Ballard, and got to talk to him a bit about some of his history and work here in Southern California. He also worked up in Idaho, but he's a very experienced, was it 25 years now, or how many years are we in the industry?
Yeah, something like that. 25. I started in 2001, so it's almost 25.
And I'm sure that the equipment and the weddings are exactly the same as they were 25 years ago, right?
Things seem to be a lot lighter now.
A little bit,
nice.
Yeah. It was probably good as you get older, right? You don't want
Right.
to haul up your Betamax machines, and So let's start with this, Michael. We met talking about what we do, which is helping people with their vows speeches and ceremony scripts and other kinds of events. But let's talk about the kind of work that you do. How did you get started in this? I saw that you were working at a comedy club and helping people film their demo reels. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So I was going to film school at Cal State Fullerton, and I had a buddy who worked at the Improv in Brea, and he decided to step down there, and he asked me if I wanted to do the job. It was basically just a sound tech. So I would go in, turn the stage lights on, turn the microphone on, and sit and watch the shows. And somewhere along the way, someone said, "Hey, can you film me while I'm on stage?" And so my first company was really just based around the comedy industry and filming and making demo reels and editing. And I got to work with some pretty cool people, George Lopez and Craig Shoemaker, and so Richard Jenny when he was alive, and so it was a pretty fun job. I was there for about 10 years, and a friend of mine said, "I'm shooting a wedding. Would you like to help me?" And I said, "Sure." I used his cameras. It didn't really click with me the first time. It was interesting. I came home and I was just kind of like, okay, that was all right. But at the time I was taking a documentary class, and he asked me to help him again. And the second time I started approaching it more as, we're just making a documentary of this day. And it really clicked with me then. And I started editing for him. And then about 2 years later, I started my own company.
It must have been really interesting going from professional comedians to wedding speeches, right? The other day we were at a bowling alley, and we just happened to be there when they were doing open mic comedy night at the bar, and it was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was. I don't think I've ever seen that before at that level, right? It was truly one of the most awkward and painful things I've ever seen in my life, right? It was terrible. You were lucky if one joke landed, never mind 10
Right.
of them, right? And they were up there for too long, and this, that same thing you would normally expect. But you see this kind of thing in weddings all the time too. There are people that treat it like it's open mic comedy night, right? And they get up there without any sense of what is funny. They don't practice it. They haven't refined it. They get up there and they just bomb, and
Right.
it sucks the energy out of the room. How often do you run into that, right, in your work?
Well, in 25 years, I've run into it quite a few times. I've also run into, listening to a toast and going, God, that guy has great timing. He'd be a great comedian. Um, but yeah, it's like they're not really thinking about the bride and groom or, the couple. They're thinking about themselves, and it's more about themselves. And the problem with that is that whole day is about the couple. And if the audience, if the guests are sitting there thinking, this guy's not talking about the couple, he's just telling anecdotes that don't really, explain what the relationship is or anything like that, it just it dies, and it's sad. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
I was going to be a psych major before I went into film, and in a way, I'm a little bit entertained by it as well, diving into people's psyches. Like, why
Yeah.
is this guy doing this?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's an interesting job, and I always think when you pick your best man or your maid of honor, you should pick someone who's going to talk about you in a heartfelt way, in a in a way that's enhancing the relationship between the two of you. And it's funny because when I edit, if the person that's speaking is talking about the couple, I will use that part.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're just telling a story about, oh yeah, back in college, me and Mark, we screwed around a lot, and that's not going in the film.
Right. Thankfully.
And nobody
Yeah.
really wants to hear that night.
Yeah.
Um,
Even when it's funny, if it's not purposefully a part of the tribute to the couple or to one of them, right? If it really isn't lifting and elevating them as people, then why say it? You mentioned it being about them. It's the agenda has to be about the couple, and I think it's like couple first, and then audience second, and
yeah,
you third in the
yeah,
order in which you place your agenda, and but it often becomes the reverse, right? It often leaves the couple worried or embarrassed or the energy just gets sucked out of the room because they said something that might have been funny to some people, but also was not so funny to others, right?
yeah. It's like you want to make sure the couple's laughing the whole time, that they don't have that look on their face, like, oh my gosh, he's talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if the couple's the only ones that are laughing, that's not good either,
Right.
because the speech is really entertainment for the entire audience.
Absolutely.
So,
Do
yeah.
you find that your time with comedy informs the way that you edit? Do you apply that sensibility to your editing as well?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes I'll find just one funny little line, and that's how I start the film. Um, it it also has, like, I have to decide if the couple's going to like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So um, one of my problems with my job is being a videographer. A lot of times we're kind of like, they don't book us first. They book us, further on down the line. And by the time they've booked us, they've talked to all these other vendors. Everybody knows them. And so sometimes I don't get to know them as well as I should. And I really love to have at least a Zoom meeting with them,
Yeah.
just so I can get a sense of their personality, because I don't want to do something that they're not going to be entertained by. And at the same time, I don't even want to take a chance if it's going to offend them.
Yeah, it's interesting
Um,
when you interview these. Now we've worked with a whole lot of couples, and the range of sensibilities. Some of them are so irreverent, and they want it to be a laugh a minute, and they want it to be very reflective of them and their personality and their quirkiness if they have any. And then there are others that want it to be very traditional. They want it to be very safe. They want it to be beautiful. They want some lightness, but not. They don't want the lightness to be dominant. And
Right.
and when you're writing these things, if you don't ask those kinds of questions ahead of time, like in our as part of our intake, we will talk to them about, well, what kind of tone is this wedding? What kind of tone do you want it to have?
Yeah.
And some of them are lights out comedy, but some of them aren't. And it's never like 100% one way or the other for us, of course.
Right.
But maybe it's 30-70 versus 70-30, right? And
Yeah.
I do think it's an interesting thing that a lot of the time the vendors aren't talking to each other and aren't sharing that information, because all of us are asking these questions in some way or another. And certainly when I'm working with a couple, I'm getting all types. I've got an hour-long interview where I'm getting into all of that stuff, and some of it would be applicable to the videographer. And if nothing else, then you'll know when the jokes are coming, and you'll know where to focus, right? But if sometimes it will expose things in the way that you might want to edit later on, pieces of it that you get a sense from them in their that what's special to them as part of their lives, and perhaps that it
Right.
can inform your editing. But we talked about the tone of this and the subject matter, but what do you think is a perfect length for speeches?
Oh gosh. I would say no more than 5 minutes. And if you can't get it done in 5 minutes, then there's stuff you can leave out,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, yeah, I think, I've
And
heard really
ideally,
short ones.
yeah,
Ideally I think 5 minutes is right. Maybe three or four,
yeah.
you know.
What is the worst or the longest one that you've seen as part of your work?
I had a wedding last year. They did, it was over 45 minutes of toast, and it put the kitchen, the chefs were just like out of their minds, because that's the big thing with a big wedding is you're feeding all these people, and it's going to throw something off. So as important as it is to let people have their say, um, yeah, there was like one dad went on for 20 minutes, and I just remember standing there thinking, most of this doesn't apply to the couple at all. Like, this is
Yeah,
about him. It's
yeah.
about his feelings, which that's cool. I mean, sometimes that's really good because it is an emotional day for the parents.
Hmm.
Um, but it just kind of went too long. And I did use a couple lines from his speech, and I kind of like took little snippets from the other ones and put them in what we call the feature film, which is, a longer edit.
Hmm.
And then I also give them the full toasts, so that they can go back and watch the whole thing in all of its misery or whatever. So
When there is something that is offensive or something that you know is a bad line that shouldn't have been said, do you ever edit it out of the speeches that you presented back to them, or do you give it back to them whole?
so I had a funny thing happen when I first started, and it kind of taught me a lesson. When I started, I was not shooting; I was just an editor. And I had this wedding where I think the groom was from Texas and the bride was Persian. And it wasn't during the speeches, but during the cake cutting, they cut the cake really nicely. She fed him his piece. He smashed her piece right in her face, which, I mean, we all have our own
Yeah,
ideas
yeah.
about that. But so I'm watching this, and they're up on this little stage, and this happens. And out of the corner of the camera, you see her dad come up onto the stage and just clocked him.
Oh my God.
And so
No.
I'm editing, and I
Oh,
wasn't at the wedding, so I don't know these people. I
right.
really don't
Oh my
know.
God.
It looked awesome. Like when I slow mode it was like out of a movie, just
Yeah.
you know. And so I thought, well, what do I do? Do I leave it in? Do I take it out? What do I do? So I called the guy that was shooting the film, and he said, you know what? You should probably call them and ask them. And I called the bride, and she said, you know what? We actually really want to see it because now we all laugh about it. But back then it was, my dad didn't understand the custom,
Right.
and
He just thought his daughter was being
he
embarrassed, and yeah,
right, he
right.
thought that I was being embarrassed. Yeah, and so I included it, and she was like, "Can you slow mo it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I already have."
Yeah, that's
So
amazing. Do you still have it?
no, I
Okay.
lost it. It was on a tape
Yeah.
because back in the day I was shooting on tapes. Um, so, but yeah, actually, well, I never had it because it wasn't my footage. I was
Yeah.
editing for someone else.
That's so
So
funny.
yeah, yeah, but that kind of taught me that you don't know what people think is funny. Um, I have a I think I have a better sense than most people just because I worked in a comedy club for 10 years.
Yeah.
But you still don't know. Like that could be really important to them and it could be an inside joke or something. So,
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned that because it's hard sometimes to know. There are families that people just say everything that's on their mind, and they're very edgy families that will talk about sex and drugs or whatever, whatever it was.
yeah.
And so once in a while you'll get a client and they want to say something, and you're like, I don't know about that, right? You'll whether it's the person's butt or sex or like you start. This is a wedding, like we still, it's a big classy affair. I'm not sure about saying something like that here. I don't want to potentially embarrass your daughter or your son. And sometimes they'll push back and, well, no, they'll be fine. I know them. They'll be good. And I'm
Yeah.
like, they might be good in home. This is what I'm thinking. I'm like, they might be good at home, but they might have a different threshold for what's embarrassing when they're in front of 150 of their closest friends and family, right? The edginess
In
might
front of
go
grandma and
away in
grandpa.
front of grandma and grandpa or their boss
Yeah.
or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
it might not be something they want to talk about here. And, but in the end, you can only give them the advice, right? I can't, they're not puppets. We're giving them a script, and they can either stick with it or not, and they're the ones hiring us to write it. But it's hard sometimes because my tendency is to be funny and edgy. I mean, that's my personal love. My favorite comics are some of the darkest and most edgy comics out there, but not here, right? Not in this
Right.
format. I'm probably more conservative than I truly need to be, but just as a safety valve, right? But it's hard sometimes because you want to push the edge a little bit because you'll get the room if it's right. But do you know that it's right? And that's why we talked about this in my last episode. But comics go on the road or they go to the comedy store and they do their 10-15 minutes and they test the material, and if the material works they keep it in or they evolve it, and if it doesn't they throw it out the window and they don't do it
Yeah.
again. And there's a process to this that you don't just wind up with 3 minutes of great material. You do 20-30 minutes to find 3 minutes, right? But it's hard to get there. Are there any other stories that come to mind when you look back on your career that stand out as either particularly great wedding speeches, and we'll get to the vows and ceremonies in a second, but either great wedding speeches or great disaster stories?
Well, I guess I'm like everybody, and I remember mostly the bad stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the fun stuff, right?
But
That's
I just did a wedding in Boise last month, and I remember thinking the best man gave a speech, and I can't remember exactly what it was that he said, but it was just about the couple, and it was funny at times, just because he does have good timing. He could be a comedian, but it was still tasteful, and they were laughing the whole time. The crowd loved it, and I think part of it goes on the bride and groom too. Like you have to know who's gonna come across to the audience and who isn't. You know, you don't want to pick someone who isn't a good speaker or doesn't want to speak in front of a crowd. Because that's like the hardest thing for someone to do, and to try to get them to be funny or entertaining it's just not going to happen,
Well, I think certainly not on their own, right? I mean, I think
Right.
that they can't, that's
Unless
part
they
of
have a writer.
unless they have a writer and someone that helps them rehearse it, right?
Yeah.
Which is part of what we're trying to do is help people in those situations, because you don't really choose your best man or your maid of honor because of their comedic public speaking skills, right? You're picking them because they have that level of meaning in your life, and they wind up in those situations for the most part, right? You can
Right.
curate it a bit if they don't want to, or you don't think they're going to be good at it, but I think a lot of times you're just put in those positions. But
Yeah.
so anyway, go on. Yeah, you were
Um,
saying.
yeah. So that was a good one. I was thinking about how I think the best couples, they really understand what family is and what the wedding and what the marriage is, It's not just a big party. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love big parties, but um, I had a couple a long time ago where the bride decided to do a boudoir book. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But let's just in
So
case anybody doesn't. It's a sexy, but not pornographic, but sexy pictures, right?
yeah, some nude sometimes,
Yeah.
but tastefully done by the photographer. So she decided to have an album made for the groom. Um, for some reason, she decided to give it to him the morning of the wedding. And so I was filming her getting ready and everything. And um, she said, I need you to go downstairs and film. The groom's going to open his gift. So I went down there. There's like, it's a hotel room. There's like 10 guys in there. I didn't know what it was. He opens it up and there's a card and he reads the card. And then he opens the book and he sees the first page and he's like, okay, now I know what this is. He goes in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at it by himself, whatever. So that was all fine. So I went back upstairs and she was still having her hair done. And she called him and she said, did you like your gift? And he said, yeah. And she said, did you open it by yourself? And he said, well, the guys were here, and she lost it and started crying and screaming and just
Oh
like
my god.
really, really upset that he was
uh,
not completely alone when he opened the gift,
yeah.
which, I mean, he's got 10 guys in there and,
Yeah.
it's,
How could he know?
it's
Yeah.
not the right time,
Yeah.
and it ended up ruining the whole wedding because she was so upset with him that she wouldn't, we're trying to get romantic shots and they're
Yeah.
not,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're not feeling it. And I found out later that they did split up. And I just thought, that's probably the most extreme thing that's happened. But I thought that's not the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
all about timing.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
In fact, like even when you have a family, things are about timing. You don't want to tell somebody something until it's the right time.
Yeah.
Um, so that was like probably the worst thing that's happened.
Well,
Um,
you started. I think you started earlier, and I might have cut you off talking about the length of the speeches, but on the short side, were there ones that were just incredibly short to the point where it was demeaning?
um, I no, not really. I mean, usually they'll just get up there and they'll do like a traditional toast that's that they read out of a book or something, and it takes 30 seconds and they're done.
Yeah.
You know, I've never had anything where the bride and groom thought, "Oh, that's all you wrote,"
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
or at least nothing that stands out to me. But
Most people don't complain when it's short, right?
they
Right?
want to get to the
They
food.
want to get to the food. They want to get, they want to get through it. And and the food thing which you mentioned earlier, it's such a big part of it, of why you have to keep these things on time, because they're not making 150 meals in real time. They're at the same time. They're doing it in phases and segments essentially. And somebody gets up there and speaks for even 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That's 5 minutes of the food sitting there.
Yeah,
And so that's a problem. It's a problem in terms of people's enjoyment, and throws everybody's balance off for the rest of the event. I just want to bring it up because you also have a podcast. You do a podcast about progressive music. Is that true?
I do, and I haven't done an episode in a really long time just
Okay.
because we had to move and everything. But I just found out that Spotify is shutting that part of their podcasting down. So I'm going to do like two or three more episodes and then that's going to be it. They're going to be
Yeah.
there, but I can't do anymore because they won't let us use the music from Spotify anymore. So that's kind of a bummer. I love doing it though. I've got people listening in from like the Netherlands and like all kinds of weird
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to name check it. There's a great guitarist here in town that I've worked with, Fernando Perdomo, who plays a lot of progressive music, and he just came out with a new album, which is excellent. And
Oh,
but
cool.
that whole scene, it's a big scene. But I bring it up also because the music that you're putting in the background of these films that you're making,
Yeah.
I'm assuming some of it is. A lot of it is not progressive rock and roll. Probably,
I
you're probably not
wish.
starting out with Gates of Delirium by Yes,
Right.
but a lot of the time when I see the wedding videos come back, there is a lot of really excellent mixing, particularly at the level that you're operating in, which these luxury weddings where the music is really well put together and well timed with the video. But how do you decide when to lean on the music versus the spoken words of the wedding? Like, do you have a pre-constructed format for yourself that you start with, or does it all develop at once as you're doing it?
Yeah, it all just kind of develops as I do it. I do talk to the clients about music and what they like. Obviously, I don't want to use like uh, the Beatles if they hate the Beatles, which who hates the Beatles? That doesn't make
No,
any sense.
that's not
But
possible.
yeah, it's not possible. But it's funny because like I had clients where they're like, I love 90s hard rock, like Stone Temple Pilots and stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. We can do something with that, you know. It might not be the full song, but I might throw 15 seconds of plush in there just to
Hmm.
see what happens, you know. It's your movie. Um, so I love talking to them, but then it's funny because like the higher end clients, sometimes they just don't want to they say you do your thing, which is really cool for me because then I can just pick some songs that are beautiful that I think really fit the day and fit what's happening and just kind of go from there. And it's all changed because now I don't know if you know, but like back in the day when Tony Romo was a quarterback for the Cowboys, he had a wedding film done and he decided to do his highlight film to Coldplay and they sent him a letter saying, "You don't have the copyright rights to use our song. You need to take it down." And ever since then,
There's sync
I
rights
think that was
for,
like,
yeah,
yeah, you have to either get
because
sync rights,
you're
which is
publishing it. Is that real? I
yeah,
mean, if he kept it
it's
all, obviously, if he kept it private, it wouldn't. Yeah, no one would care.
and
But
some songs you can get easily, but some songs, people are surprised when they find out it's like $60,000 to get a license just to use it for their wedding film.
amazing. Yeah.
Um,
Is that its own? Is
so
that its own category for sync licensing? Essentially,
um,
are wedding films broken out separate from advertisements
yeah,
and stuff? Okay, yeah,
it's considered non-broadcast, so it's not the same as if you're making a commercial.
yeah,
Um, and that's like a whole other road we could go down.
yeah. Of
Like I
course,
can't believe Led Zeppelin is licensing stuff for car ads and stuff.
yeah.
That just blows my mind. But yeah,
Interesting. Let's talk about ceremonies for a minute. What are some of the things that you've seen, good or bad, in ceremonies and the spoken vows, and what moves you and what has repelled you along the way?
yeah. I always love it when the couple writes their own vows, or if they get help with that, that's great too. But telling the story through the vows, you think about most weddings when you go, unless you're family, you don't know one side of the couple. And so it's important that that comes out. And of course, that's gold for me when I'm editing.
And when
Um,
they start crying, I presume you'll love it, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
best. Yeah,
The emotion. If they're not crying, then sometimes I think, what's going on here?
yeah, yeah. I love that, like that shaky voice, that starts when they're getting close, and there's just certain things that that the audience just like they start to get all excited about, and when they see it, they go,
Yes.
oh, and then the next thing you know, you're crying. And it's just,
And that's the, it's funny because I was thinking about it earlier. The way things are now, like you can make a pretty decent visual film with your phone,
mm-hmm.
but you can't get the sound. And so that's where it kind of sets us apart. And I have couples, they tell me, oh, we decided we're not going to do video. Why not? Oh, we're just going to have our friend film it with their phone. So
Yeah.
yeah, the sound is huge and the emotion is huge. And I think if it's written, that draws the emotion out, you know? Yeah. So that's so important. And then music, I love live music. I've always loved filming, bands and artists, and anything live is going to add to it and add to the emotion. I think it's much better than, someone pressing play on a recorder, I think.
What are some of the common mistakes that you see people make, either in the delivery of a ceremony, if they're an amateur officiant that's an ordained officiant, for example, or in the vows? Are there things that you see often that you're just like, okay, we could have solved that very easily?
I've had a lot of times where it's a family member or it's someone who hasn't done a lot of ceremonies, and they forget to tell the crowd to sit down, which, like, logistically for us, that's hard because we may have cameras in the back that can't get a shot because they're standing.
Mm-hmm.
There's that. I've actually seen officiants skip parts of the ceremony just because they didn't realize. Like, one time I had a couple that got married, but they never exchanged rings. And we were like, okay, can we shoot that now? Like, can we bring them back up?
Yeah, yeah,
um, yeah, so I always, always, always try to at least find out if their officiant is experienced. And if they're not, just, if they seem nervous, I'll say, hey, if you see me going like this, it just means tell everyone to sit down,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah. What is your favorite kind of client, or what's the ideal kind of client for you? I know, someone that's going to spend an enormous amount of money with you, but what, when you're thinking about your target clientele, what would be the perfect fit for you?
I've learned to work with all different types of people in all different cultures. But for me, it's really important that they understand how important the film is. If they come to me and they're like, this was top on our list, those are the people that I want, because I know that they're not gonna, they might just set me loose. They might just say, hey, do what you normally do. But they're also probably going to be somewhat interactive with me on
Mm-hmm.
it. And that, it just makes it so much better after having done, I probably have done like 800, 900 weddings now.
Yeah,
It's just so much better if they're in the same place as I am, and they just didn't understand the importance, and they really want it. They want a good film. I love that. It's not just somebody who's hiring us because their parents said they wanted it or whatever.
yeah, yeah. We made such a mistake by not hiring a videographer in my own wedding. It was just, I look back on that decision making process because it we just wanted to have a good party, and we wanted to have our friends in the room, and that was really all that this is our second marriage, and that's really all we focused on was food, booze, and people, right? But now 7 years later, when memory wanes, right, and all you've got was the substandard photographer that we got because we didn't really spend a lot on that either, and I really wish we had some of that video there. Some of those people are gone now, and it's like,
Yeah.
I really wish I had some of that video, and I just don't. We were lucky to get the speeches, and that was only because a friend of ours happened to break out her cell phone right in time, and no one had asked her to. She just did it. But if it hadn't been for that, those would have been lost too. And so it's just one of those things, like, everybody out there, if you're even slightly on the fence, whether you work with them or not, just hire a videographer, please. Just don't even question it.
Yeah, and I think, what you do, Brian, with helping people write their speeches and their vows, that is so helpful to a lot of people who don't speak in public, and they don't, that they
Yeah.
don't know how to tell a story. And it just, it's funny because, like, I was thinking a lot of us that are in the industry, we do what we do, but we wouldn't necessarily have had weddings like the ones that we work at,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, I had a friend shoot mine. Um, to me, the most important thing was getting all the guests on camera talking. And that didn't
Yeah.
become
That's
as
nice.
important to me as it is now, because my dad passed, and he passed suddenly. Like, we didn't know.
Mm.
He just got an infection, and one day he
Yeah.
was there, and you
Oh
know,
man.
and that's the kind of thing that I work for, like
Yeah.
documentary wise. My kids are grown now. Yesterday was the first Father's Day I've had where I didn't do anything.
Yeah. Same. Which is nice. You get to finally, you get to treat, do whatever. But still, no, you're spot on. I mean, it has to. You have to look at this with a longer lens, right? And
Yeah,
in your life, and no pun intended, and
I like that. Can
and
I
think
use that?
about why you want it now and why you're going to want it 10 years from now, and what and how you want it to look and feel because of the sensibilities long term and whatnot. But I mean, let's face it, you're not going to like your own haircut, from back then. But at any rate, I think it's so important. And I do think, going back to your point about people not feeling comfortable, part of not feeling comfortable involves the content, and part of it involves just the delivery aspects. You want to do a good job in performing it, but it's easier to do a good job performing it when you like what you're saying, and when you've worked on it a little bit. And I think, but all of that comes together with what you're doing and the content, and the one thing you're going to be able to look back on is this video this video documentary of what happened, but it's going to be the words and the visual. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be both, and
Yeah,
I think that's something we're trying to highlight. We were surprised that there weren't more people doing this, because the words are such a big part of the wedding, always.
huge.
What are some of the things that you've heard in your 900 weddings plus? What are some of the things that just make you cringe? Like, you've heard it over and over and over again, and if you hear it again, a shiver is gonna go down your
Uh,
spine.
the one verse from Corinthians, like, I think it's been said, and so, I don't know if that's blasphemy to talk against the Bible, but, like, I've heard that phrase,
Like,
that
over, yeah,
quote, that verse so many times, and it is an important verse, but there's a lot of other stuff in there, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Anything else come to mind, or is it just generic
Uh,
stuff? They just,
just, yeah, generic stuff, like, the having the upper hand, that whole thing, like, she put she put his hand on top of hers and said, "This is the last time you're gonna,"
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I feel like everybody's heard it if they've been to weddings, and it's more important to talk about the individuals and about what makes their relationship work,
yeah. And going back to your point,
whether
yeah, go, sorry.
I was just going to say, whether it's funny or not, like,
Yeah.
I just think that's so important.
And there's a reason why why comics don't do the same material over and over again, because you just can't get that same laugh the third time you've heard it, right? It's just
Yeah.
not going to happen the same way. And so they stop doing what they put on their TV special, and they do something new. Unless you're Andrew Dice Clay, but then you still,
Yeah, there are some guys that have that ability to
right,
do the same bit over and over, and
right.
it works.
Right.
Yeah.
And in deference to him, he does do excellent work besides the stuff that he always. But still, like, you want to hit them with something fresh, and even though it's I guess it's a fun line with that hand the first time you might have heard it, then that's it. Don't ever do it again. Don't ever let anyone do it again.
And maybe it's me. I don't know.
No,
Maybe
it's
I've
not
just
you.
heard it
It's
too
not
many
you.
times.
It's not you. I
Okay.
mean, I don't even go to that many weddings, ironically, because we're not part of the day of event, right? We're not at 900 weddings. We do the work, and then they have their wedding somewhere in the world, and so we don't get to be there. But I've been to enough weddings to know that there's some lines that you just go, oh gosh, I've heard this a million times already, and
Yeah.
and or even if it's on TV, it's on, you see it on TV, you see it on the weddings on TV all the time. It's just tired.
Yeah.
Can't be tired.
Yeah.
So, 25 years, 15 cameras later.
Maybe more. I don't know.
Yeah. What is it? Let's end on this now. What is it that you love about doing this work?
I think I love the storytelling and the documentary aspect of it. Um, I try to approach it as, I don't want it to be like a TV show. I don't want it to feel like they're in like a movie set or whatever. Like, I don't even really want them to know I'm there, honestly. The best compliments that I've gotten have been like, we don't even remember seeing you that much. Like, that's what I want, you know? The documentary thing just kind of came together for me. And so I think being there and being able to put it together and being creative and working with them and making something that they're going to want to watch or show their kids or their grandkids or whatever. That's why I keep doing it. I don't do it as much as I used to. Like when I first started, I was doing 100 weddings a year, maybe. I had multiple people working for me and all that. But I still enjoy it. And I still, 15 or 20 a year is fine, or maybe less.
Yeah. Michael Scot Films, that's Scott with one T. Michael, MiChelscot, films.com. You can find Michael on Instagram as well. Is it the same, Michael Scot Films on Instagram?
It is, yeah.
Great. Please check out his work. It's beautiful stuff. It really looks amazing, and you can tell there's a really nice approach to the visuals, but also the editing. It's just beautiful stuff, and you can sense the experience. And
Thanks,
there are a
man.
lot of
Thanks
people.
for having me.
Oh, it was great to talk to you. It was a lot of fun, and wishing you all the well in this next year. Oh, God, let me try that again. Wishing you well this next. This is why you need to practice, people, because if you don't, you might have to do it twice and edit it out. Wishing you well this next year, and
live is always different, man.
Well, thank God for editing. We get to edit out some of the mistakes here, but have a great year, and
thank you.
It was great to meet you and talk with you, and I'll see you soon, I hope. If you need help with your vows, your wedding speech, or your ceremony script, you want to make it personal, you need some help practicing it, visit vowsandspeeches.com. That's VOWSAND speeches.com. You can reach out to me there. You can send me an email at Brian, BRIAN, @vowsandspeeches.com. But I'd love to help you.